What is up, guys, and welcome back to the channel. In today's episode, I have the LX470 in the garage, and I'm going to be changing the rear brakes. And what I mean by the rear brakes is we're going to be putting on some new Stop Tech calipers, Stop Tech drilled and slotted rotors, Akebono brake pads, and also all the flex brake lines in the rear of the vehicle. And with that, let's jump to it and get started. Alright guys, so to get started, obviously you're going to want to take the wheels off, you're going to want to support the vehicle. I have jack stands underneath the axle here, and then I have wheels placed underneath the vehicle just for extra security precautions in case anything would happen with those jack stands. What I'm going to do, since I'm going to be replacing all this stuff, it's going to be a little bit different if you're just wanting to do pads and rotors, but it still should give you a pretty good idea and guide to how to take all this stuff off and put it back together. On the back of this caliper, you're going to have two bolts, which is attaching it to the actual brake mechanism. They're going to be 17mm bolts, so let's go ahead and break those free. Alright, now that both bolts are free, you're going to want to go ahead and take off the caliper. Now, if you're just going to be replacing the pads and the rotor, you're going to want to make sure you mount this somewhere where it is secure and not putting undue stress on this brake line. For us, it doesn't matter because we're going to be replacing all of this, so I'm just going to put it off here to the side. If you had a toolbox or just a box that this thing could sit on, you could just pull it off like this and then just sit it over here to the side. I'm just going to put it up here for right now and then get this little clip undone for the brake line, and then break free the brake line, and then just take all of this over to the bench. Now here on the back side of the brake line, you're going to have this little clip that holds this into place, and then this is going to be a 10mm. So what I like to use is a flare nut wrench to get on there and get a better grip, and I'm going to break that free first, and once that is free, then I'm going to go ahead and knock this retainer clip out and then take the whole assembly over to the bench. Alright, so with my 10mm flare nut wrench, I'm going to go ahead and break this free. And as you can see, I shot some penetrating fluid on it because this one actually looks really nasty, and it's probably going to need it to help break free. So I gave it about 10 minutes to sit, and then hopefully this will help it loosen up that much easier. Yep, already broke free. And then again, make sure that you have a pan underneath this to help drain whatever brake fluid may be coming out. So I'm going to go ahead and get that all the way unhooked, and then I'll show you how I hammer this little retaining clip, and then we'll take the rest of this over to the bench. Alright, so now that that has been disconnected, I'm going to take my screwdriver here and I'm going to put it right underneath. There's a little lip here on this clip. I'm going to put it right behind that lip, and then from underneath I'm going to use my hammer to knock this clip out of place. Alright, now that we had a little bit of movement, I'm going to get my vice grips in here and see if we can't pull this thing the rest of the way off. And there we go, that's it. And maybe as you can see, this one is a little bent here. But like I said, I ordered brand new ones, so we will be replacing that with a fresh one once we put everything back together. Alright, let's head over to the bench and show you the new caliper and brake setup. Alright, so say you are still on the truck and all that you're wanting to do is replace the pads and then the rotor. So you're going to have this set aside, you're going to have it supported, and then you're going to want to first take off this bracket right here. What is holding it on is two 8mm bolts. So let's go ahead and take those off. Alright, we're going to set that to the side. And then you're going to want to take the actual piece with the piston off to be able to remove the brake pads. So you have 2 bolts right here. These are the slide pins, and you're going to use a 14mm socket to break those loose. At least you hope. Holy cow, those are on there pretty good. So now we'll go get the big boy and see if we can get those loose. Now, since I'm not going to be reusing this, it doesn't matter to me if these bolts strip or whatever, but we're going to use the impact, see if we can't get this thing undone here. There we go. Just that easy. Alright, so you're going to take these out, and then that will release the piston. Also, at this time, if you had a tool, you'd want to push the piston back in place, and then as you can see, you have access to the pads where you can pull them out, like so. Discard those. You're going to want to take off this old hardware, install new hardware. So you're going to want to replace this hardware. As you see, it's pretty crusty. You're also going to want to lubricate these channels so the pads go on smoother. Some people lube these up, some people will do the ends of the pads, whatever you want to do. I'm going to show you how I do it with the new ones. That's going to pretty much be it if you're going to be doing it on your vehicle. So you take all that off, you put the new stuff on, make sure you grease them, check your slide pins to make sure that they are greased, and then put it all back together. And then once I put it on the vehicle, I'll give you the torque specs for everything. So now we're going to get this old piece out of the way, get the new one in, and then assemble it and put it on the vehicle. Alright, so here is our new caliper from Stock Tech. As you can see, it has an R on it, so it tells you what side of the vehicle it's supposed to be. Now, the first one that I had replaced on the driver's side, I was using these slide pins, and as I was pushing it in, I noticed that it sounded very metallic. So I undid the bolts from that side, and then I pulled out the slide pins to check them to make sure they were lubricated. And on the driver's side, they were not. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull these slide pins out, check them to make sure they're lubricated. If they're not lubricated, then we're going to go ahead and lubricate them, put them back in, and then put the hardware and the pads in, and then put this back together. Now, it does appear that these have been properly lubricated. Let me check this one here. And this one is lubricated as well. So I guess that was just an oversight on the driver's side. But it's always good to check because you want these things nice and lubricated so they can move freely and not bind. So since that is complete, let's go ahead and start putting on the hardware. The hardware that comes with it are these 4 pieces, which are what the brake pads are going to go into. And it also comes with these 2 copper washers, which is going to be for the flex line that you attach to. Now, the flexible line that I bought came with 2, so we're just going to use the 2 that came with the line. Alright, so hardware is installed. It just pushes into place. And then the biggest thing you want to notice with this is these outside tips here, right? They're coming out. Make sure they're not facing on the inside, because if you face on the inside, potentially you're going to have that rubbing up against the rotor, and you definitely don't want that to happen. So whenever you clip these in, make sure that all these little end pieces are sticking out away from the rotor. Alright, so let's go ahead and apply a little bit of grease to each one of these, and then we're going to put our pads on. Alright, so I've applied just a thin layer of grease within all those grooves on that bracket, and then now we're going to put our pads on. This is my pad of choice, Akebono. The thing I love about these is that, one, you do not have to break them in. You can just start driving on them, and they are very low dust. After I ceramic coated the exterior wheels and the added bonus of these hardly dusting at all, my wheels stay clean for really a month to 2 months on end without having to be clean. These are really good pads. I would highly recommend them. So let's go ahead and grease up these ends and install them into our bracket. And then also be careful, especially when you have things greased up, that you're not touching any grease part of your hand to the surface of the pad. Alright, just tapped in place, and go ahead and put the other one in as well. Alright, so now we're ready to put these two pieces back together. I put a small amount of grease on the back of this pad for the piston, and I also greased up the backs of these because it will be pushing against the other pad here. So we're going to go ahead and put those together, and then we're going to put these bolts back in, and that's going to be torqued to 20 foot-pounds. Now sometimes you will have this where this bolt is moving, so I'm going to go ahead and get a wrench to put on there to make sure that stays put, so we can go ahead and torque this down. So those bolts have been torqued to spec, 20 foot-pounds a piece. Now it's time to put in our new brake line. This is what I'm going to be using today. Again, for all the other brake lines and everything else that I use, I'll leave them in the description box down below. But we're going to go ahead and put this on. There's going to be one brass gasket, then the line, then another brass gasket. And then you're going to use the same banjo bolt that you had from the previous on this one right here. So let's go ahead and install this new brake line. All right, now that that is pretty snug, I'm going to go ahead and torque it to 22 foot-pounds. All right, so that is torqued down to 22 foot-pounds. This whole assembly is ready to go back onto the vehicle. The only last thing you're going to want to do is put that extra shield that you had taken off previously with the two 8mm bolts, and then you're going to be ready to go. But what we're going to do now is we're going to go and take the rotor off, and I'm going to show you how to do that. Alright, so the next part of this job is you're going to want to get the rotor off. The parking brake, if it was done correctly, is probably still going to be causing some drag on this rotor. So what you're going to want to do is there's a little hole here. It's kind of your spy hole. I don't know what you call it. But that's what you're going to use to see inside, and there's going to be a little gear. Now, the one on the driver's side was at the bottom. I'm going to assume this one's at the bottom. I'll show you what it looks like from the driver's side perspective. But you have the hub, and it's kind of behind and tucked underneath the hub. So to try to show you through this hole is going to be almost impossible, even with light. So that's what it looks like, and that's what you're going to be trying to find in there. Take a flathead screwdriver, and once you feel that gear, you're going to want to start pushing it down. And if you push it down, that should start bringing the shoes inwards, which will allow this to come off much easier. If for some reason you need to use bolts to push this away from the hub because it's frozen on there, there's two holes right here, and I will put the exact specifications for the size and the thread pitch on the screen right now because I've already forgot. But you can pick two of those up at your local hardware store like I did for the other side. You put them in, you thread them in, and it pulls it away from the hub pretty easily. We're going to see if we don't have to do that with this one, and see if just undoing this gear and bringing in the pads will release this freely. So I'm going to go ahead and start clicking that down and then see if we can get this rotor off the rear. Okay, it seems like I have done as many clicks as I can on that. So let's see if we can go ahead and pull this rotor off. And just like that, there you go. Now, I didn't show you what I did on the driver's side, but let me tell you, it was horrible because I still had, I guess, these shoes pressed up against the rotor and it would just not budge. I don't know if you can see it here, but this little spring here, there's two springs on both sides which kind of like retain these pads from going out too far. And I had actually bent that hardware because I was pulling on it so hard trying to get it off. Before you try to take the rotor off, make sure you get that gear down here and you push it down to where these come in so you can take it off that much easier. If you've pushed it all the way and it won't go down anymore, then probably it's maybe the hub and the rotor are still seized together, and that's when you can use the bolts here to then pull that off. But definitely use the gear first. Don't have your park and brake engaged because then these guys will be pushed out. Have it disengaged, make sure you have the wheels chalked, make sure you have this thing secure, use the gear. I'll just say it went a lot easier doing it this way than what it did on the driver's side. All right, so let's clean up the surface and then we're gonna install our new rotor. And then after that, we're gonna put everything back together. All right guys, so I have gone ahead and cleaned up the hub. I put a little bit of grease on there just because I want to do as much as I can to stop any future rust from happening. And then also, in case I ever have to take the rotors off, hopefully it'll be a little bit easier in the future. Without further ado, let's go ahead and put on the new rotor and see how it looks. And I spray this down liberally with brake clean to get any of that rust preventative film off of it that they might have had from the factory. And I'll probably wipe it down one more time before we put the actual caliper on. But we're gonna align the hole up in the bottom where that spindle gear is, so then we can also set the park and brake before we wrap up this complete job. And there you go, it's set. All right, so now that the rotor is on, I'm gonna go grab the caliper. We're gonna attach that, put the brake line on, clean it one last final time, set the park and brake, and then call this job done. All right, now it's time to put the completed caliper back on. We're gonna put it back in this location with the 2 bolts that we had taken off previously. All right, finally, after some much to do, I don't know why those 17mm bolts would not line up very well, but finally got them to line up. And now I'm gonna torque them down to 76 foot-pounds. All right, bolts are torqued. Now it's time to connect the brake line. All right guys, so now let's go ahead and connect this brake line. I put like a little finger condom on the end here because I was doing some cleaning and I did not want anything to fall down into the brake line. So let's carefully take that off. So I'm going to examine in there real quick just to make sure there's no debris. Looks clean of debris. And we're just going to join these 2 together. So they are put together, and now we're going to put our clip in to keep this guy secure. That clip is in place. It is holding that. It's nice and snug. I'm going to take my 10mm flare nut wrench and tighten this the rest of the way, and then we're going to go ahead and button this up and then set the park and brake. Alright, so the final thing to do here before we set the park and brake is going to be to put this cover back on with the 2 8mm bolts. I think what this does, it extends over the slide pins, so I think this just adds extra protection to these bushings, so maybe nothing jumps up and hits them or cracks them or what have you. But it was on the original, so we're going to put it on this one as well. Now I was just reading the procedure for setting the park and brake. Without going through all of it, because it seems like it's going to be a long and tedious process, and I'll actually put the instructions here on the screen. But basically what it's saying is to take that little spindle there, expand the shoes until the rotor has no movement, then back it off 8 notches, and then it goes into some other stuff. It took me 10 clicks to bring the park and brake up, so I'm going to do that preliminary step. I'm going to get it to where this locks, back it off, and then on both sides, and then go back into the cab and pull the parking brake and see if it's less clicks to engage the parking brake. And if it is, I'm just gonna call that done and move on. And then at the end of the video, I'll let you know if it worked, or if it's still 10 clicks, or if there's anything else that I had to do. Alright guys, that is going to conclude this video. I hope you found it helpful for this rear brake job. I will be doing a front brake job at some other point in time, and that will be another video, and it will encompass so much more than just doing the brakes. So stay tuned and subscribe to the channel for that. While I was doing the brakes, I noticed that the stabilizer end links were bad. The bushings were all wore out. As you can see, these sway bar end links have some motion in them. So I chose to replace the driver's side. It's nice and snug. We're about to replace this one as well. All right, and this is a job done. As you can see, absolutely no play whatsoever in that stabilizer end link. So I also replaced those while I was doing the brake job. The total cost of this service was about $490 for me, but once I send in the old calipers as cores, then I'll get $90 back. So this job cost roughly $400. And as far as the parking brake goes, I went from 10 clicks and now I'm somewhere about 5 to 6 clicks to get it fully engaged. And setting the parking brake wasn't that difficult. As long as you can find that little gear in there with your screwdriver, it actually goes pretty quickly. And yes, I do have to bleed the brakes on this vehicle before I can drive, but I'm not going to include that in this video. We did a similar brake bleed on the 2000 Camry series, so I will leave that linked up here depending on what platform you're watching this video. I will also leave it at the end of the video if you want to click on that and see how to bleed your brakes. And I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope that it was helpful. Again, be sure to go and do your own research, especially when it comes to torques and things of that nature. There's going to be plenty more videos on this LX470, so make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on that. Hit that notification bell, like this video if it did help you out. Also, share with your friends and the Land Cruiser community. As always, I will leave everything that I used today down in the description box below. Thank you again so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.